Hearth of the matter. If you're going to take anything away from this broadcast, remember, if you're going to change the world, don't ask for permission. Welcome to the Hearth of the Matter. My name is Maxwell Burton and I'll be hosting tonight's event. Make sure you're comfortable and have a warm beverage to accompany you as we gather around the hearth. Now, today it's my pleasure as I introduce Abby Connolly. So, why don't you tell us a bit about what you've brought to us tonight?
So today I'd really like to talk to you about my favorite book, The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane by Katie DiCamillo.
So, well, what is it? What is it about? What happens?
So it is a children's book. I know that it's my favorite book as a children's book. I don't know what that says about me, but truly it's much more than a children's book to me. It's about a China rabbit and his misadventures and how he learns to navigate life. Again, it is a China rabbit. Why is he learning to navigate life? We don't necessarily know, but you get to learn a lot about him throughout the book, and I think that through that, you get to learn a lot about yourself.
So, is this like a living rabbit or like a toy rabbit?
So it's a toy rabbit. He belongs to a little girl named Abeline. He was given to her by her grandmother, Pellegrina, and at first he is extremely conceited. He's a China rabbit. He has fancy clothes, a pocket watch, hats, pajamas, his own bed. He's very, very well taken care of, and he knows it, and he wants everybody around him to know it. But one day, Pellegrina, who had given him to her granddaughter, she looked him in the eye and said, "I am disappointed in you." And from there, we start to see why she's disappointed and see Edward kind of learn how to get out of that disappointment and learn why Pellegrina said that to him.
So, what sort of incites the main action of the book? What exactly does he go through that we explore life and his relation to it and
Definitely.
ourselves?
So he starts out living with Abeline on their house on Egypt Street, and one day Abeline and her family are going on Queen Mary, and they're going on a long trip along the boat. And Edward gets thrown off the boat. He's being tossed around by schoolboys that steal him from Abeline, and he gets tossed off the boat and never to be seen again.
Not ideal.
No, not really what you want having happen to you. Of course, he's wearing his hat. He loses his hat in the tussle, and then he spends months and months and months in the deep, dark sea going through storms, and it's then where he first gets his real feeling, and it says, Edward was afraid. Prior to that, Edward was only thinking of when Abeline was going to come home to take care of him and brush out his fur and clothe him in the finer things in life, I guess. And he spends months and months in the ocean just tumbling and turning, and then eventually he's picked up by a fisherman. And the fisherman takes him home to his wife, and she's a grieving mother who doesn't have children, and they start to take care of Edward. And Edward at first is like, this is really weird. This is not what I'm used to. They're dressing me up as a girl. I'm Edward, and this is not who I am. And then from there, he gets passed along to different people and starts to learn more about what it means to be Edward. And
sorry, with the fisherman and his wife, is he able to communicate with them?
So no, he is a China rabbit, and he
so he's
cannot
conscious,
talk.
but he cannot speak.
Yes, he knows what's happening, but nobody else knows that he knows what is happening.
He's in pain, but he cannot scream.
It's true, extremely true. But I think that that's a really interesting perspective to have in the book, is that you really only see his insights, and you see everything through his eyes. And the narrative that Katie DiCamillo paints with that is just really beautiful.
So the whole book is through his inner monologue and then what's happening to him, but he can't engage with. Can he move on his own?
No, he cannot.
So he's entirely at the whims of the world,
yes, he
silently
is.
screaming, conscious only to suffer.
Right, so that's why he gets left in the ocean for months and months. During the tussle with the schoolboys that are throwing him overboard, he cannot scream for help. He cannot move or...
Entirely helpless.
Yes, entirely helpless.
Okay, so he gets taken in by the fisherman and his wife. Then
He gets picked up by a homeless man.
Okay, could be
Eventually, the fisherman and his wife, their daughter is a city slicker, and she comes back and she sees that they are treating Edward as their child, and she says, "This is weird and not right." So I must...
I think she's got some points.
Fair, but she tosses him in the garbage. So then, after months and months in the ocean, he gets thrown into the landfill, and he gets buried in the landfill.
We've all been there.
Yeah. For months and months, he's toiling and troubling, I guess, in the landfill of garbage. And that is when the homeless man finds him, digging through the trash heaps with his dog. And his dog thinks it's a real rabbit and is very excited for the find. But didn't pan out. It was a fake rabbit. But Edward at this point is just, he's devastated. He's going from this posh life. He thinks he's going to be able to accept the fact that he's going to get treated as a girl rabbit, and then he gets thrown in the garbage. So then he and the homeless man travel along the train tracks, and he's with him for a good number of years, and learns the sad homeless songs and meets all kinds of people along the way, and really experiences discomfort. I guess aside from the months of the ocean, he experiences discomfort for a prolonged period of time, and he's dressed in tattered clothes and holey hats, which is a far cry from what he was used to. But he just was learning to navigate, the fact that he's not in a space that he's comfortable with anymore.
Sorry, how much do we get to know about the people who he interacts with? Like, do we get to know the hobo's name and his background, his story, and is there a connection between him and Edward? Or
Yeah, so we don't actually get a background for many of the characters that Edward's interacting with. Whatever Edward hears through conversations that are had in front of him, we get to understand. But we don't necessarily know why the homeless man is homeless, how he got there, or where he ends up after Edward departs from him. So after Edward is taken away from the fisherman and his wife, we don't hear from them ever again. And he thinks about them. When he's out on the lonely nights with the homeless man, he starts to think about Abeline. He always remembers her, and he remembers the fisherman and his wife, which is something that we didn't see at the beginning of the book when he was only thinking of himself.
So he meets this homeless man, and then I think it's all right that we go through the book, because I think it'll be important. Yeah. So he meets the homeless man. He learns about them. Does he learn about other homeless people, or is he?
Yeah, there's community. So they're train hopping. Sometimes they'll stay in one place longer than they will another. But again, you don't really get the deep background about the people that he's meeting, because it's only through his eyes, through what he understands, and for what happens directly in front of him. And again, he can't communicate with them, so he can't even ask. At this point, he doesn't really care to ask yet. So it's really just him observing all that's going around him, and at times he doesn't want to exist. He doesn't want to be the rabbit that he is.
Mm-hmm. How does the book keep things moving forward with a non-engaged, like a protagonist that isn't actually moving the plot forward himself? How do things keep interesting? How do they keep moving forward?
Definitely. Well, I think, from the first part, we are going through his life at Abeline's house, and it's going through the day-to-day and what he's experiencing. Then something unfortunate happens, and he's thrown into the ocean. Then when he starts to get used to life with the fisherman and his wife, he gets thrown in the trash. Then when he starts to get used to the life of the homeless man, he gets tossed off a train. So unfortunate things keep happening to Edward, and we've yet to learn why these things are happening. Somehow DiCamillo is able to keep that engaging. She's able to write a book about a China rabbit that cannot talk and cannot move on his own, and make you feel for him. And it's really through the characters that she's developed around him.
So after he gets thrown off the train, then where are we?
So then he ends up getting picked up by a woman who lives in the countryside, and she turns him into a scarecrow. So now he's been tossed in the ocean for months. He's been buried in a landfill. He's traveled across the country over trains, and then he is nailed to a post. And he's nailed to the post with, you know, the rattling pie tins, and crows come and peck at him, and it's pretty miserable. Again, somehow more miserable than being in the ocean for months and being buried by garbage.
Sorry, it's another question.
Yeah.
How are the crows and the environment and other animals and things portrayed as? Like, how are they expressed? Are the crows malicious, or are they simply being crows?
I think they're simply being crows. Edward, we know, can't move. He can't talk. So to him, it's like a mockery that they can move and they can exist and he cannot. And he is literally nailed to the post while these things are antagonizing him. And, you know, we don't see anybody feel for Edward until the woman who had turned him into a scarecrow, she has a little boy that she's hired to help him, and that little boy looks up at Edward like he's the most beautiful thing in the world, and all he wants to do is get Edward and bring him home with him. And eventually one day Edward falls off of the post, and the little boy grabs him up off the ground and brings him home. At that point, we learn that the little boy has a very, very sick little sister, and the boy just wanted Edward for her because she didn't have any dolls to play with. They were very poor. They didn't have their mother with them. And all that little boy wanted was for Edward to be with his sister, for his sister to have something nice. So then Edward spends the next couple weeks living with the little boy and the sister, playing with buttons, listening to the girl cough and cough and cough every single night, until eventually that little girl passes away. And for the first time, Edward feels like he wants to cry. And of course, we know that he can't do that. So again, like these tragic stories that are happening to these people, you know, the fisherman and his wife lost their children. They were using Edward to fill that void. The homeless man didn't have anybody that could stick by his side, so he was using Edward for that. The one lady didn't have a scarecrow, and so she used Edward for that. Mm-hmm. And the little boy and his sister didn't have anybody that they could rely on, so Edward became that for them. So I think through that, Edward hasn't learned like what he's doing for people, but he's impacting each and every one of their lives just by being there, and not by talking, not by moving, not by making actions, simply just by being there for when they need him. And then eventually the little boy and Edward set out on a trip of their own, and the little boy ties strings to Edward and uses him like a marionette doll, and tries to make money that way. But it's at this point that Edward's head gets broken.
What? Edward's
head gets broken. A man grabs Edward, slams him against the wall, and his china head breaks into tiny, tiny pieces. And of course, the little boy is devastated, and he will do anything to get Edward fixed, and that includes giving Edward away. So he brings Edward to a pretty famous doll maker's shop. He's renowned for being able to fix any doll and make them as pretty as they can be. And he does not hesitate to take Edward in, but he says to the little boy, "Since you cannot pay, I must keep Edward." So the little boy does have to give up Edward, and Edward is repaired, and he's put back in fancy clothes, and then he's put on a shelf, and he stays on that shelf for a very, very, very long time. And during that time, when he's not really around people, he begins to reflect on everything that he's learned. And he stays on that shelf and stays on that shelf and sees other dolls getting taken home, and he starts to realize that maybe I was wrong to just want to be on a shelf. Maybe I was wrong to just be conceited all the time, because now I understand that there is so much more to life than just being a pretty doll.
And the book doesn't end there, does it?
Not yet.
Okay.
Because then somebody at the end.
I'm sorry. We'll get back to that
Yeah.
right after this break. Thank you, and stay tuned because we'll be right back with more discussions by the Hearth.
All across the country, people are coming together to speed up what we can learn about health. The All of Us Research Program is calling on 1 million people to join us as we try to change the future of health. For your family, for future generations, for all of us. Visit joinallofus.org and find out how you can become 1 in a million.
Our son Arjun was born with cystic fibrosis. CF is a genetic disease that shortens lives. When the foundation was founded in 1955, children with CF rarely lived long enough to attend kindergarten. Today, thanks to the foundation's groundbreaking research, advocacy, and care, some people with CF are attending college, getting married, and starting families. We've made amazing progress, but until a cure is found for all people with CF, we will not stop. Help us add tomorrows. Visit cff.org today.
Is there a danger hiding in your home? Unused opioid medicines could harm your family. Find your unused opioid pills, patches, or syrups and learn how to dispose of them safely at fda.gov/drug disposal.
I hope you enjoyed the break and are ready to get to the heart of the matter. So, why don't you tell us this riveting conclusion?
So, after months of being on the shelf and months of reflection, somebody very important to Edward walks through the door and lifts him up off the shelf. And I'm not going to say who that person is. I can't. I want everybody to read this book. It's so important to me.
No, I gotta.
I have to?
No, I'm saying now I've got to read
You
the
have
book.
to read it,
Now
exactly.
I do want, I just, it's focusing on the book review, just the whole concept of a silent protagonist, I have no mouth, yet I must scream, and having that sort of exclusively, almost a bystander to life, that sort of perception of things and that clarity to, things is really interesting. Especially it's that, he seems like he comes into people's life and he often acts as, oftentimes we just need someone to talk to. We just need something to empathize with, something that will be there for us. And it seems like he fills that void for a lot of people.
Definitely. And I think, one of the important things to consider with that is that he's not doing anything. He can't do anything. And the fact that he's still doing something, still being that person, I guess, to talk to is amazing. And it's done so subtly that you don't necessarily realize it. I first read this book when I was 12 years old. At the time, I didn't have enough life experiences to understand a lot of what was going on. But it always stuck with me ever since. So now I'm 21, it's been 9 years. And I've started reading this book about once every year for a long while. I don't exactly remember, but it's been a long time.
So, I suppose the main thing would be just sort of, what's your take on the book? What is it trying to say in this?
It's hard because every single time that I read it, I get something completely different out of it. And while I remember the story, I remember the characters, it's it has a completely different meaning to me every single time that I read it. So I guess this discussion has helped me a lot, understand that sometimes it is just being the person or the thing there that's consistent and with you. I guess for me, Edward's journey is about understanding that love is what is going to make you happy in the end, and without that, you're not going to have really anything. Edward goes from being a really empty soul, and Pellegrina, the grandmother who had commissioned him, pretty much says that to him. She looks at him and says, "You disappoint me," and at the time he brushes it off, he doesn't understand, but then towards the end of the book, when he's sitting on that shelf, he thinks of Pellegrina and what she said to him, and he understood that it was because he didn't love Abeline nearly as much as she loved him. And he starts to see that the people that he was able to cross paths with shaped him, and taught him how to love and taught him what life was about.
I think this is a very deep message, deeply profound message in this, of just sort of the people that come and go in our lives. There's the people our families or those around us, but of course, we don't always, not everyone stays in our life the whole way. We often will lose people, and, new people will fill their space, but there's always pieces that you take away from them that you carry with you, and then new ones you find from meeting new people, but of course, inevitably, people come and go out of our lives, and we come and go out of theirs. And I think there's a huge theme and message about that through this book, of just, as finally once you're starting to get settled and comfortable with your new life, you're thrown into a completely another one, and you lose somebody, and it's so hard to articulate and express that as just the sensation of having this life you've built around these people and those that you're connecting with and learning with, and you understand them, they understand you, even if you can't always communicate that quite literally in this book.
Right, definitely.
And then losing that. Then finally, with the message the parting message from Pellegrina, the parting message she gives him of her disappointment, I think, is what makes all of that come to life so much more, because I'm sure you can think of people, and I'm sure you can think of people in your life that you would wish could see you now. That, you can't now, but you wish you could show them the person you are versus the person you were then. It's
definitely, and I think too, it's important to know Edward's own journey through this is that, he completely changes. He is no longer selfish. He still can't necessarily emote that and give back, but he understands that even the small amount that he did was helping. And he does carry everything that he learns from everybody. He carries Abeline with him when he's at the fisherman and his wife. He carries the fisherman and his wife and Abeline with him when he's with the homeless man. And that just continues. So really the patchwork of people that you meet are what makes you. And there's some parts of you that you can leave behind, like the conceitedness, the selfishness. And there's some parts of you that you can really accept and grow and maybe learn that you have.
So do you feel you relate to Edward? Do you empathize with his journey and his way he learns and the people he meets? Do you connect with that?
At first you hate him. You hate him. He is so mean to this little girl that just loves him. But I think ultimately his journey to understand love is something that everybody can see in their own lives. Everybody knows someone who maybe they think doesn't have the best attitude, but there's always something deeper going on. And I think with Edward just being this China rabbit that you would look at and think there's nothing going on there, that's a China rabbit. But being from his perspective, you can see the emotion that he goes through and you can see the things that he's experienced. And I think by putting that on an inanimate object is incredible to think about, just because again, it's not something that you would think has feeling, has a story, or maybe the people that are voiceless have the thoughts that need to be heard. So I think that those are some really interesting concepts that DiCamillo explores.
The best way to explore life is something devoid of it, almost effectively.
Right. And I think for me too, it's again that patchwork of the people you meet that make up who you are, and it is love and it is loss that let you learn more about yourself. Because if you stay in that sheltered hole, you're not really going to get anywhere.
If you never do more than you can, you will never be more than you are.
Exactly. So Edward becomes much more than himself throughout the course of the book, which is, it's exciting to see. At times, it's really frustrating. Like I said, you really don't like him at the beginning, and there's times when he's going through this journey that you're like, wow, like why can't he just accept this? But I guess the people that he interacts with are really what make this story for me. There's not one person that you don't feel for in their stories. And I think the fact that I can continuously read this for 9 years really is a testimony to that.
So you would recommend this book to people?
Absolutely. I recommend it to everybody. I think it's probably like my #1 on my Goodreads. Again, it is a children's book, but I've been reading it for 9 years, and I just think it's a fantastic piece of work.
I don't think it being a children's book means it can't have a profound or meaningful message. I think there's plenty of children's tales that people could still do to learn from.
That is true.
So, is there any character or any part of the book that especially reminds you of your own life and your own experiences?
I would say that the scene that always sticks with me is the little boy and his younger sister, and they don't have anybody that they can rely on, and in many ways they feel very alone until they bring Edward into their life. And we've seen a lot of loneliness with Edward, as he gets tossed in the ocean, tossed in the landfill. That's the scene that will make me cry without fail every time that I read the book. And it's just how losing somebody or something in your life can have such a profound effect, but ultimately still being able to carry those memories of that person with you is what makes life worth living. And I think there's a reason that scene sticks out to me. I think it's something that I still have to explore. Just the innocence in that scene, and the power of love that can come from young people, I think, which is overlooked sometimes in the grand scheme of things, it's just beautifully written and something that always sticks with me.
I think the final thing is that you can, especially with the little girl in relation to Edward, is that she is in a very similar position to him, that she's been able to sort of really act on her own or be her own person the same way Edward is unable to really express himself.
Definitely. I think that's a really important thing to note as well.
Mm-hmm. So, good book.
I think it's
I'm
the
gonna read
best
it. I need to read this.
I really hope everybody does. Like I said, it's my favorite book. You can take that as you will. But again, since I get something new out of it every single time I read it, it's something that I'll carry with me my whole life.
Absolutely. Hopefully, I can carry the same going forward with myself after I read it.
Definitely, I'll try
and
to
find out who it was that walked in that door.
See, I had to entice some people to read it, you know?
Thank you, Abby Connolly. You've been spectacular for the show, especially for a first episode. Absolutely fantastic.
I'm very honored to be here.
Is there any final things you'd like to say in the brief seconds we have left?
Please go read The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane.
Thank you. All right. Time, ever fleeting, has run its course, and here we part. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you, my dear viewer. And always remember, all toasters toast toast. Good night.